We're going to start the evening with an announcement. It is Michelle Perez, who is the sister of Annette Zellman. It's her 95th birthday today. We've already sung happy birthday to her, but we're going to sing happy birthday to her right now, which she will see tomorrow when we send the video to her. We're live streaming right now on my Facebook page. Hi, everybody. And so,
happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Michelle. Happy birthday to you.
Many more. Join Michelle. And I also always like to light a candle when I talk about my lost girls of the Holocaust, which is what so much of my research does. So this is a memorial candle as well. So I'm gonna start with the backstory of our story, and that happened in the Hamptons. Laurence Kurz, who is the daughter, identical twin daughter of Michelle Perez, is one of my best friends. And for years, decades, we've been sitting on the beach, generally with a beer and some cheese puffs, and she will say, Heather, you should write a book about my aunt. And I'll go, Laurence, I don't want to write about the Holocaust again. And the next day, Heather, it's a very good story. You know, the whole family, they go to the free zone in Annette. She disappeared from Paris. You should write a book about my aunt. I go, Laurence, yeah, chill out. Let's go jump in the sea. So anyway, a few years ago, right before COVID.
And you always said it's your family story.
And I said it's family lore. It's just a family story. Everybody has a story, right? The Holocaust is full of family stories, but without primary research, without primary sources, it's very hard. All right, right before COVID, Laurence says, Heather, my mother, she inherited a box of letters that were written by her aunt to her brother, and her brother's just died. And Michelle has inherited a box of books and an art diary.
Diaries.
And I said, oh, Laurence, that's the story. So Simon was in England. I called him up. I said, get your butt to Paris and do a pre-interview, and let's see if this is a book.
Off I went. It was a burning hot summer day.
He always does what he's told, I just want to say.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I know my place. Heather always likes to say, I was only brought on board by her to write this book because I'm fluent in French and German. Nothing to do with my writing skills. I'm just fluent in French and German. So anyway, off I went. I flew over to Paris. It was baking hot. Everybody's pouring sweat on the subway. I arrived in Montmartre at the Square de Clignancourt, where Michelle Perez, who was Annette's kid sister in the war. Annette was about 18 and Michelle was about 8. And she
12 to 14.
12 to 14. And baking hot, arrived covered in sweat, door opens and this incredibly elegant, you know how the French are, a woman of any age is this beautifully, elegantly dressed. She's wearing a white pantsuit. She's beautifully coiffed. She looks cool as a cucumber, fit as a flea. This is a woman of 92 who's very busy playing bridge and
avid bridge and golf.
She's a live wire. So I've shown into this beautiful apartment. We sat at the table. Big table is covered in documents, files, photographs, excerpts of diaries. The wall is covered with family photos. There's Annette, there's Annette's father, Michelle's father, in an extravagant sort of Cossack uniform. And we sat down and I interviewed her and videoed her for 3 hours. And that's when I first met Annette. And by the time I left, I knew, well, we've got a great story. This is an amazing story.
Yeah. So we sort of divided up the writing between Annette and Jean. So I got Annette, Simon got Jean.
Tell us a bit about Annette.
So Annette, first, during the invasion of France, the family was in the far east in Nancy, which is very close to the Alsace border, and they fled, like everybody did. There was a huge evacuation, and they ended up in Paris.
First to Bordeaux.
Yeah, and so they end up in Paris, and Annette, she's 19 at the time. She has the world as her oyster. She decides that she wants to be an artist. She's already been an actor. She's 19. This is what I'm going to do today, and this is who I will be. So she decides to apply to the Beaux-Arts, and she does a magnificent drawing of the discus player. It is the first time she's ever drawn a nude man. She's very proud of her work, and she gets in. And runs home, but she gets in, and we have these amazing photographs of her with her friend Yannick Bellon, who ends up being a very famous documentary filmmaker. And they are celebrating. She's holding on to the discus, and
discus thrower.
The discus thrower, and hugging him. And and so the book really starts with these photographs that inform this moment that is caught in history. That we don't actually know what was going on, but we know they're obviously celebrating. We know it's cold because of what they're wearing. We unpack these pictures and give them a narrative structure. And we know that they go to the Café Flore, which is just a couple blocks away. And the Café de Flore was famous because it was warm. Yeah, it was the only cafe with a coal-burning stove, and all of the poor, starving artists and the students knew, including, let's say, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, they knew that they could sit there all day with one cup of coffee
and keep warm.
Right?
Simone de Beauvoir wrote in her memoir that she always raced to the Café de Flore to get there early.
First thing in the morning.
To get a good seat by the stove.
Right. So Annette becomes part of this clique. Among the people at the clique are a number of Sorbonne students. They're in the philosophy department. One of them is Jean Rouch, who will become a very famous documentary filmmaker. He is really the creator of cinema verite, right?
Anthropological.
And he immediately is attracted to Annette Zellman. They have a large flirtation, which is quite humorous. She calls him the flea in the glass jar. Right. She's the glass jar. He's the flea.
He's the sort of alpha male of this group of young students and artists and writers.
Jean Josian, who Annette will eventually fall in love with, is also part of this group. And there is a woman called Bella Lempert, who is part of this group. Do we want to do Bella now, or do we want to talk about the Zazus?
Well, Bella was a Zazu. I'll give a quick intro about the Zazus.
Okay.
There's a fascinating part of the research. We've got a great picture somewhere, haven't we? Where is it?
Oh, here.
Find it.
Yeah.
The Zazus, and we have on the tape the Pet Shop Boys did a song about the Zazus. The Zazus were called Zazus after a Cab Calloway jazz song, Zaza Zuzu Baby. And they were a kind of 40s version of the punks, or the mods and rockers or something. They had a distinctive way of dressing. They had their own dances, their own code words, their own way of going out, their own foods. I think they were into tomato juice, and they wore English carrot juice, and they wore English brogues. They had a whole style, and they were loathed by the Jeunesse Française movement, which was the Pétain Nazi youth organization in France, because they represented everything that, Pétain didn't want French youth to be. And I just read a little thing here. Jean Rouch, who was around at that time and part of it, who became very famous, as Heather said, after the war. He wrote in a memoir after the war about the Zazus. Our only weapon was the scandal of our outfit. For quite naturally, we had found a path of protest by taking the opposite view of the appearance of German soldiers of our age. We contrasted our long hair with their shaven necks, our long jackets, zoot suits, with their shaved jackets, our high-collared English shirts with their low necklines, our narrow trousers with their too wide breeches, our thick-soled English shoes, already the latest stocks from J.M. Weston, and their iron boots. Some of us had fought against them in the first round of the war, 1940 to 41, and we knew that, for the time being, we could only fight their blitzkrieg with swing, and against their goose-step and Sieg-Heil with our double-step danced at the Boisserie Club to the chanted silences of In the Mood. And among other things, they had Zazu's had a dance that they loved called the Pelican Step, which Heather, if you really, really promise to pay her a lot of money, she might even just show you, but she can tell you what it is.
The Pelican Dance is it's part of the Jean Josselin group. They had a jazz band, and we do have a Spotify collection of music that's in the book that we have found. And the Pelican Dance was it's based, we call it a foxtrot on cocaine, and it's sort of like the turkey trot. There's a lot of flapping and sticking your belly out and acting like you are a pelican, right? And it was just very silly. And they went wild for it. The Zazus, all of the young people, they love to dance the Pelican Dance. So we had a great time actually working with
Musicologist.
a musicologist. He was with the piano and playing and giving us all the music and helping us describe the syncopation. So back to Bella Lempert. Bella had her Zazu look down. The only
We haven't mentioned who she is yet.
Thank you. Bella had her Zazu look down. The only missing element was the bleached hair. Hers was ink black. Romanian by birth, Bella and her family had emigrated when she was a child to France. While she had grown up outside of Paris in the middle-class suburb of Asnières, she was a chic city girl. When she began her studies, she moved to an apartment on Rue Saint-Jacques, near the Sorbonne. Bella was a regular fixture at the floor and became one of Annette's closest friends. 2 years older than Annette, Bella had a bit more experience with men, but in the photo that Jean Rouge snapped of his friend, she looks more like a bookworm than a temptress. So, this is the photo.
The glasses were all part of the Zazu look.
And this is one of the most important parts of our research. So, when you're doing research for a book, you never really know where you're going to go. There's a lot of rivers, and you sort of head down, and there's a tributary that takes you someplace. Well, we were at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and we were going through the Jean Rouge archive. And
looking for photos of Jean Josselin, of which there are virtually none, tragically.
Right. So we had gotten permission to go through these boxes of photos, hoping that there was a photograph of Jean Josselin, and we spent a couple of hours going through these one photograph at a time boxes, and we were on 1942. I was on 1942. You had just finished 1941, and at the very bottom of the box is this photograph, and I don't know who she is, right? No idea. The only thing that I know is that in the letters of Annette, in the archive, there's a mention of this girl, Bella.
Frequent.
And there's a surrealist painting that she's done of Bella, which is not complimentary. And because as best friends, they had a falling out over a guy who was Jean Josselin's best friend. So there I am in this very quiet archive. And I turn the photo over, and I see written in Jean Rouge's scroll, "My neighbor on Rue Saint-Jacques, dead after deportation, Bella Lempert." And I began sobbing. I can't tell you. And it was like finding a friend, like she was waiting for us to find her. And, so much of my work is going through lists, deportation lists, right? It's really cheery work. And they're just names until you find a face. And so I will say that the insert of this book is, full of faces of women who were with Annette going to Auschwitz that have never been connected to the deportation list. And in my, you know, in the Jewish tradition, you die 3 deaths, right? The first one is your body. The second. The third is that nobody says your name again. But I also add to that, if your face isn't connected to your name, when your face is connected to your name, I feel like you get to live immortally, hopefully, through these books. So that's my connection to a lot of this work, and finding Bella, you know, was an incredible moment. And even though she and Annette had a falling out, I fell quite in love with Bella. I just
She was
adored
an
her.
interesting, intelligent
Yeah.
Trotskyist. And she was an important character in the book. She is an important character because some of Annette's best letters are about Bella, because they were love rivals at the Café de Flore. They dated the same guys. And they sort of hated each other and loved each other. And some of Annette's sauciest bits of writing, and she's a very funny, brilliant, we loved her letters. That was the main source of the book. And some of the sauciest ones and spikiest are about Bella, in one of which she describes her arriving stinking of cheap perfume and her rancid armpits.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a Citron. She drives it up to the cafe floor, over the sidewalk, and comes in and goes, "Where is he? Where is he?" You know, starts screaming and making a scene. I mean, it is, to talk about the letters that we found in this amazing archive, and there are about 90 of them. A lot of the letters are to Charles, who is Annette's brother, who was in prison for black marketing, working on the black market, and then we have love stories between love letters between Jean Sauchien and Annette. Well, we have Annette writing to him, because we do not have the ones that Jean wrote back to her, and so, but the relationship between Charles and Annette is full of puns, full of double entendre, and we actually had to hire help, like with a cultural historian who actually had written Jean Rouche's biography, because he knew the time period so well. There were things that we were missing.
References to films, to poems, to plays on words. When
he would, you know, I would send him a paragraph going, "I feel like there's something in here I've missed," and he would come back with this list of everything she had packed into a paragraph that was culturally stimulating to Charles, who was stuck in prison. And on top of that, you know, his mother would take food, but Annette would send books, lots and lots of books. Yeah. So we both developed these amazing relationships with our subjects. And Simon, do you want to talk about your relationship with Jean Josian?
Oh no, you talk about Annette first.
Well, I keep feeling I'm talking too much.
All right, yes, it's true, you do. Well, Jean, Heather will tell you about Annette and how she felt. Of course, I fell in love with Annette as well. She was a wonderful character, so funny, so full of life, and of course her ending is so tragic. This beautiful, beautiful girl.
No
and
plot spoilers. No plot spoilers.
And Jean, we had a ton of material for Annette. Of course, all these letters, drawings, so many references. Jean, who I handled mostly, the division of labor, we'll talk about later a bit, I handled mostly Jean's stuff. And it was difficult because there was absolutely nothing left of him. He was the only child of a doctor, his wife. There was no family archive, no letters, no documents, no photos. Scant references here and there in a few books about him, because he was well known. In the 30s, he was a sort of prominent figure in the Dadaist, surrealist set. He had his own magazine called the Reverbère, which means street lamps. They published Dada poems and illustrations, original drawings and paintings by painters who became very prominent. The Reverbère had their own jazz band, and they had these sort of crazy happenings, a bit like the 60s, happenings in the 60s.
He had a big fight with André Breton.
Yeah, I mean, I knew all of this about him, but that's not really the heart of the man, you know, and so he remained always kind of opaque for me because I couldn't get inside his head because I had nothing to go on, no letters, no diaries. God, I would have loved to have had some. So I just knew who he hung out with and his cultural significance, but that didn't go under the skin.
He had a huge collection of surrealist art.
Yes,
and
which,
one of my
some of which he
favorite
gave to.
one of my favorite scenes is when Annette comes home, and she comes home with a Macadam, which is very dark and very disturbing. And she comes home and she announces that it's a gift from a friend.
So as not to announce a suspicion. It's
right.
a gift from a friend at the Academy.
From the Beaux-Arts. A friend who's painted it, because she knows her parents won't recognize Macadam. And she proceeds to hang it immediately over her parents' bed, and her father says, "I'll never sleep again."
Yeah. We should say a little bit about her family, because that was a joy as well.
The Zellman Circus.
Yes, the Zellman Circus, the Zellman family. There was 5 kids, all different ages. There was a leader of the pack was the father, Moshe Zellman, originally from Poland, with a brief excursion to St. Petersburg so he could dress up in a Cossack uniform. He became Maurice, Frenchified his name, and he was a tailor, a master tailor, as Michel always joked. He dressed half of Paris. And it's how he got the family through the war.
Yeah.
You know, he would go and sell clothes in the country. He got a car. He'd drive
Get a
out.
chicken.
He'd come back with chickens and eggs, and he was always on the trading, pulling the rabbit out of the hat, both literally and proverbially. And a great, wonderful, larger than life character. Joie de vivre, funny. He had a beautiful voice. He was a cantor at the synagogue, but not an Orthodox family at all. And Heather can tell a funny story about that. And he'd carry on, and after dinner he'd get at the piano and he'd sing these Russian love songs with tears pouring down his face that he learned in St. Petersburg. And when he was over egging it a bit, his wife, who was the opposite, she was the sort of grounding to his high wah, electric wah, and she was absolutely, you know, no nonsense. All these chaos of these kids, she was just, nothing would faze her. She was completely laid back. She plonked the soup down in the middle of the table, said, "Help yourselves," and that was it. Nothing could bother her at all. And when he was over egging it a bit, she would say, "All right, that's enough, Sarah Bernhardt." But there's a great moment where she does feature very strongly, and that's sort of typical of the woman that she was that when the roundups start, they come, the police, there's a rap at the door, and she knows those aren't neighbors, those aren't friends.
Nobody knocks on their door.
Nobody knocks.
They just go.
Yeah.
You just go.
There's 2 gendarmes, and they say, "We're looking for Mr. Zellman, Maurice Zellman. Where is he?" She says, "Ah, that bastard! He ran off with some whore 2 weeks ago. I haven't seen him since. I hope he rots in hell if you find him."
So she starts yelling. They take off. They're like, "Ah!"
And they leave Paris the next day.
Yeah. Well, I know immediately.
Maurice and Charles, the son.
Yeah.
Because it's men they're looking for
Right.
most.
So, so that sort of launches us into the Annette part of the story, which is that the family flees Paris. The noose is tightening around the Jews of Paris. It's before the Velodrome. It's the winter of 1942, which is one of the coldest winters on record. And Annette says, she says, "I'm going to take care of the apartment, and then I'll follow you to the free
And
zone."
she had a job with a seamstress upstairs. She said, "I'm just going to finish, doing some work for Mrs. XYZ."
But they had to get the paintings that Jean Josiane had given her.
By then they're worth $1 million probably.
But, so they have to get them back to Jean Josiane's apartment. Of course, her plan is not to follow her parents, but to move in with Jean, which is what she does. And the family escapes to Limoges in the free zone. And that's where our story turns from light and funny. I want to share, this is not in color, but it gives you an idea of, this is one of Annette's works of art that survives, and it is a very small photograph. It is a blue.
Right.
Blue was a very important color in the family.
Beautiful poem.
That that Maurice had blue paper, and she used to secretly steal it because paper was very rare, right? It was not. It was very expensive, so she would take and she would write about blue, the color blue, and so this was a photograph. It was a that she took the negative, and she experimented in the darkroom with it, and she. Can I have it?
Oh, sorry.
So, and one of the things that I love about this photograph is, and we unpack it, right? But it is a sort of a combination of Venus rising and Rousseau's Eve. And you can totally see, and she's written about it as well. So one of the things that was really wonderful was working with Michelle, going through these things and pulling out some of these artistic references. You know, we also have surviving envelopes that are full of code that she's written, done little cartoons on the envelopes coming out of prison, but they're telling the true story, right, of what's really going on. And so there's a lot of, you really do get a sense of who she is. She creates, so she is arrested the moment they decide to get married. They file their marriage bans, what they have to do in Paris, and within 48 hours she's been arrested, and within 24 hours of that 48, Theodore Dannecker has passed a law that it is illegal for a Gentile to marry a Jew, and she is now a political prisoner.
Mm.
So the first place she is the depot, which is at the Palace of Justice in the Citadel in Paris, and then she's moved to Les Tourelles, and from there she's deported to Auschwitz. And one of the things that I love about, we're supposed to talk about the things that we love about working together, and then we'll tell you what we don't know. But one of the things
Grounds for divorce.
one of the things that I love about working with Simon is because of his background in National Geographic, he's great at field research. And, you know, one night about midnight.
You're told at National Geographic, I remember my editor, my first work with him, he said, you know, at National Geographic, the trick is we want to smell the street that the noodle seller is on in Saigon and feel his world through your eyes.
Yeah.
So that's what the field work is all about. It's kind of putting the reader right on the ground.
Yeah, so like at midnight, one night, hot summer night, we got in the car, we went to Boulevard de Strasbourg, where Annette's family apartment was, and then we drove the dark streets to the Citadel across Paris. The Citadel's right on the Seine. And we walked around, we snooped, we wrote, I walked my dog, who should be here tonight, but it's late
The
for
Palais
him.
de Justice is this like 4 blocks long, immense chateau-like building. It's in
Les Miserables.
Les Miserables,
Yeah.
the famous
You've
scene
seen it,
where
yeah.
the police chief overlooks it.
Right.
Calls it the tenements of
Very
darkness or
intimidating.
something, yeah.
But, you know, that's
And in
where,
the basement was this prison called the Depot, which was a holding prison for people that were rounded up. And when Annette is dragged down there, it's full of whores and, you know, it's awful conditions.
and political prisoners.
So yeah, we drove and
So we drove, we walked around, we wanted to get a sense of like, what did she
what
see
she feel like.
in the salad basket, which is the paddy wagon, the French paddy wagon.
They call it a panier de salade because of the grills on the windows. They call it a salad basket.
So the, while she is in the depot, the Yellow Star demonstrations begin. And the Yellow Star demonstrations in Paris were, you know, the moment when Parisian Jews suddenly had to put on the Yellow Star, and a lot of Gentiles decided to stand in solidarity with their friends, and they got arrested. And then people who were going to get the Yellow Star, if they didn't have it on, they were arrested. And I'll show you a photograph because this is a beautiful young woman. Her name was Elise Mella. She does not survive. That's her picture. And she dies on the same day as her mother in Auschwitz. They're arrested together, and they're arrested going to get the Yellow Star. And she is one of the things that's incredibly sad about these, when you go into the Yad Vashem archive, you'll find forms from families. Anybody have any information? And they're usually dated in the 90s because that's when the opportunity became available to write these forms. So her father has written for her mother and Elise, does anybody have any information about what happened to my wife and my daughter? Bella Lempert, there's nothing. That's because her entire family was wiped out. So when you don't have a family member looking for information, you know they're gone. And it's almost in that emptiness. Simone de Beauvoir writes about the empty seat
At the
Café de Flore after Annette and Bella disappeared. The empty seat is that seat that should be full, and it isn't. And then she writes about how many, that empty seat is a metaphor for so many that disappeared. And
I might just read that. It's very short, but it's very poignant. And it shows, you know, Annette's quality, if you like, and that group, that such a famous author as Simone de Beauvoir would write about these girls, who she obviously found tremendous. Where is it? The empty seat, that's true as well.
anyway,
Oh no, yes, here she is. From across the room, Simone de Beauvoir felt Jean would go back to the cafe and be moping in the corners, and she felt they lost and suffered with them. The way these gay and beautiful girls simply vanished into the blue without a word was terrifying enough in itself. Josian and his friends still came to the floor, but there was no mark on the red banquette to indicate the empty seat place at their side. This was what seemed the most unbearable thing about any absence to me, that it was precisely a nothingness. Yet the faces of Bella and the blonde Czech girl, that's Annette, were never erased from my memory. They symbolized millions of others besides.
and among those millions is Sonia Mose, who we also have a photograph of. I got really captivated by Sonia. She was in the lesbian corner at the floor. And this is her mannequin. She was one of the few female surrealist artists.
That's Man Ray.
It's one of the few female surrealist artists in the expo. I think it was 1936, the Surrealist Exhibition. And that is a mannequin that looks like her. She was a model for Man Ray. She was a muse. She was very good friends with Picasso and Dora Maar. And when she's first arrested, which she's probably denounced because she was beautiful, when she's first arrested, she goes to Les Tourelles and she sends a note to the Café de Flore. I have no stockings. Please, somebody send me some stockings. And she's gassed at Soberport.
Just a word about Les Tourelles is one of the two prisons, and that was in the depot, which was an awful, awful nightmarish place, and she really, really suffered. She was then transferred to Les Tourelles, which is in the east part of Paris. Still there. It's now it's the site of the French Secret Service, in fact, in that building. And that was a much easier.
In, but they wouldn't let us in.
I wonder why. That was much easier going for the prisoners. There was a big yard with a chestnut tree. They could go outside. And it says a lot about Annette that no sooner had she got to Les Tourelles and bonded and met these other girls that were arrested, Yellow Star or not, then, you know, they were all forming art groups and reading clubs and a Russian learning club and a gymnastics club. And Annette's at the center of it. She writes to Jean. She was able to exchange letters with Jean saying, you know, I met this beautiful girl from the 16th. I love her so much. We love the same books and art, and we talk all the time and late into the night. We're always laughing, and the other prisoners, they complain that we're laughing, but I don't care because we're having fun.
She loved belly dancing.
She learned belly dancing.
With the Booby, who's
Yeah.
Alice Henny, who goes on the transport with her. A beautiful redhead Algerian Jew who was arrested in a fur coat and her evening gown for trying to make a phone call. I mean, all of these women, we don't have all of their arrest records, but I did my best to find out why they were arrested, because it's so shocking, such petty, petty crimes. And we are fast forward to the end of the war. Jean Josien is 1945. Paris. Is,
44.
44. Sorry, 44. Paris is liberated finally, and of course nobody knows. They just all they know is that Annette's headed east.
Yeah.
So Jean Josien decides to rescue her.
Jean Josien, alone in Paris, in limbo, without Annette, her stockings, her dresses, her scarves, some of her art, her paintings, still in his studio apartment on Rue Laugier. And he writes a novel, he visits her parents in Limoges, they hire a lawyer, try and get out of prison unsuccessfully. So, and by then, when the liberation of Paris begins, he becomes really a full-fledged resistant. He fights on the barricades on the Boulevard Saint-Michel, and then the minute that Paris falls, Leclerc's army comes in, followed by Patton. Jean hops, he gets a gig with Franck Tireur, the newspaper of the Resistance, hops in a car with 4 other journalists, one of those old Maigret Citroën cars, and he drives east, not really knowing where he's going, but she's somewhere in the east, probably Germany, perhaps Poland. He's going to go and find Annette. And off he goes, and there's a wonderful description by one of his friends, who's a fascinating guy called Georges Huguenet, you will read about Jean setting off. All fire, all flame, covered with revolvers and armbands. That was how Jean Josien was dressed. Standing outside of Jean Buca's gallery, his dear friend Georges Huguenet wished Jean luck in finding Annette. Leaning, quote, on the side of a car, his hair blowing in strands over his forehead, Jean Josien radiated confidence and determination, Huguenet recalled. So he went off, and without giving a plot spoiler, he ended up near Metz, but on the French side, above the river Meuse, at a village called Gravelotte, which was famous from the Franco-Prussian War. It was a huge battle there, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. There was a French expression, ça tombe, la pluie tombe comme à Gravelotte. The rain falls like at Gravelotte, meaning the blood spilling onto the earth. And we drove from Paris following the route he would have taken. It's actually, you can do it, it's called the Voie de la Liberté, or Liberty Road, and there are markers in the villages where Patton passed through. It's really great, and get a sense of that journey. He was, he was with in the Citroën heading there, and they reached Gravelotte, and we followed and got to Gravelotte, and there's a farm there called Mogador Farm, which we described, and that was sort of briefly well known because it's where Patton, General Patton, holed up for 2 weeks because his tanks broke down because he had no gasoline. And General Patton famously said, "My men can eat their boots, but my tanks need gas. God damn it!" So he was stuck there for 2 weeks. We went and found the farm. It's still there. Knocked on the door. Little peasant woman. Didn't know anything about Jean Josien, but knew all about Patton. A historian had been there some years before, and she pointed out in the farmyard, and there was a sort of a
we had pictures of the tank shells.
Huge American tank shells, and a trenching, a spade,
and a
US
canteen.
armor, and a water bottle, canteen.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was
That's all described in the book.
It's also I love doing the fieldwork. One of the things that I did in terms of Jean Josien was one of the first people to scuba dive with Dumas and Cocteau, and Michel talks about being a child and listening to Jean Josien talk about the world underneath the sea. I mean, you have to remember, nobody has ever seen underwater like this before. And so I went diving down in the Mediterranean around the Calanque near Sanary-sur-Mer, which is south of Marseille, because I wanted to see that world. And I will tell you, it is as above, so below. It is Provence. There are fields of sea anemones that are purple like lavender and yellow like sunflowers. It is so rich. The limestone calcium is such a rich environment. So I think that's my favorite part about working.
And he published a big article under a pseudonym in
at
Paris
Soir.
Soir, and Annette was very proud of it. She told, after they met, she fell in love. She told her brother proudly in a letter, and he's a writer and a poet, and he's even been under the surface of the sea with a little mask and a. What can't this man do?
So what was your favorite thing about writing this book? What was your favorite
When
moment?
it was finished. I can tell you what my least favourite moment was being whipped and beaten by Heather doing all the bibliography and the source notes, which is an absolute nightmare for anyone. Heather was very good at it. She'd done it before. I wasn't. So she was keeping track as she went writing. I didn't, so I had to go back. Where the hell did I get that bloody quote? What's this reference? And she'd say, you can't leave that without sourcing it. Oh, awful nightmare.
What about your favorite moments?
My favourite moment was the research in Paris, being with Michel. Well, yeah, being in Paris with Michel and having, of course, we had a beautiful little apartment in Montmartre from a French artist that we. Heather was very clever because it was for sale. It was on Airbnb for some outrageous amount. Heather wrote, explained what we were doing. Said, you know, could you give us a break? She'd give us a way lower price. Little apartment, beautiful, setback from the main street, on Avenue Barbès, with a little garden with a 150-year-old olive tree. And that's where we spent our time because you couldn't eat at restaurants with COVID. So we would cook and we'd eat out there, play cards, and drink all of that wonderful chilled rosé wine, and we would eat pâté.
I have to say, my nails have never looked better as that summer in Paris. They were long. I never paint them. I painted them. I was like, ooh, with nails like this. This is why.
French butter.
It was, it was so, all that butter.
What was your favorite moment?
Well, I already talked about it. So I think we should open that up for a Q&A. Anybody have any questions for us?
Please, don't be shy.
This is a very substantial book. You started, and how long did this take you?
We started in 2020.
Yeah.
We were in COVID, and actually there's a.
After 3 years.
Well, this is just my portion
of it.
of
Ended
it.
up with. That's what it looks like.
Wow. Here, Simon, put it right here so that they can see it too. The live streamer.
set it on
Move
fire.
the candle.
Oh, God.
There we go.
It weighs about 10 pounds.
Yeah. So this is sort of an interesting side story. We sell the book, and we're in England.
Thanks to our agent who's
Yay,
here.
here's Scott. So we're going to go to Paris, but I wanted to come home to America, see my dad who was ill and almost 90, or was 90 at that point, and I literally woke up in the middle of the night with a voice saying they're going to close the border to Americans in the EU. And by the time Simon had woken up in the morning, I had changed everything. I had changed my flight. Was looking for an Airbnb, and he woke up and I said, they're going to close the border to Americans. And he said, yep. So within 5 days, we changed everything. And we were literally, had just gotten through passport control. We were waiting in line to
Heather
get...
flew to England and we drove to Paris.
What?
Oh no, sorry.
What are you talking about?
You came with the dog, yeah, to Paris, yeah. What are you talking about?
I don't know where...
Heather will tell her story.
Yes,
You tell it.
yeah. We were in lockdown for 6 months. I mean, I had been in England since January.
Oh, you're talking about England,
Anyway, now you know how difficult it is to write a book with Simon. So we literally had just gotten through passport control, and the news is they're going to close the border in 5 hours, and I had already gotten through. So we knew once we got into Paris that I couldn't leave. He could, but I couldn't. And so we stayed. We were in the apartment in Paris, and then we did our tour, field research, going all over France. We actually used trains. You were allowed to travel at that point on trains with masks. And then we had our car, our British car, so we were driving on the wrong side of the road. So that was 3 months of research, and then the writing, and then
Well, no, I mean the book research,
the scholarly research as well, filling in the field research and everything. And then a huge amount of archive and permissions, photo permissions that we had to get. Yeah.
That was
So it was
complicated.
2.5 years. I mean, you guys really,
$10,000 it cost us.
you haven't
All the
really
photos.
seen us a lot because we've been so busy. Yeah.
Did you write the entire book before you sold it?
No.
No, no,
God,
no.
no.
We
It
had
was
a
a
pretty
proposal.
detailed
Yeah.
proposal.
Yeah.
Very much look forward to reading it. It just sounds so compelling and wonderful, great subject.
Thank you.
When you're doing this kind of original source-based work, and in particular from that period, you've got these letters, which is wonderful, but at some point, you're having to fill in
Yeah.
assumptions about what people did, possibly states of mind. I mean, people have different parameters for how they write that kind of thing. And also, maybe there are a few people left alive who heard the stories and knew them, but clearly, given the time period, that's limited. So it would be wonderful to hear what your decision was about how to
You know,
make those
I really
linkages.
intuit a lot.
Uh-huh.
You know, and I will say that in Annette's letters and in the photographs, you know, you get a real sense of what was really going on underneath, and you have a sense of character. So, for instance, we don't know for sure why they decided to get married, but Bella Lempert had been arrested 6 weeks earlier, in the middle of the night, from her boyfriend's apartment, who was Jean Josian's best friend. And so, logically, I think they went, how can we best protect Annette? Let's change her name to Josian, because his father is an anti-Semite. He's a famous doctor in Paris, Gentile, and she'll slip under, and that's just logic, you know? We don't know that that's true, but we present it as we surmise that, exactly. And it is, you have to be so careful, because
I mean, we had an absolute hard and fast rule. We're not going to invent
we didn't
things.
make anything up.
We
No.
stick to the facts, what we know of the facts. But that's to say that, you know, what we wrote is sort of narrative nonfiction, and the reader yesterday said it. God, she only realized when she got to the end that it was not a novel, and that's a compliment for us. We hope it does read like a novel. So it's that thing of, I think Bruce Chapman, I think, famously said, the best nonfiction most resembles fiction, and that's true. And
terms of
you're
art,
dancing on this borderline between fiction and nonfiction. So, yeah, we didn't invent facts, but we did imagine scenes that we knew had happened, like the photograph at the beginning of the book, the taking of the photograph. We knew who took it, we knew who the other girl was, so you create a scene.
Right.
Yeah, and that was our method throughout.
Yeah. It is hard, yeah, and you do, you know, it's very, if you're familiar with Tia Miles' book about the sack, I'm forgetting the title right now, but she, you know, she talks about how she takes this piece of this object, right, and then unpacks the truth and the story out of that object. That's what we did as well. I mean, there are many things that we used in the book that, like, Annette does crazy, weird stories, right? She's very inventive. She has, and you read them and you think, this makes no sense at all. But actually, when you slow down and you go, oh, this does make sense. Like, oh, she's just mentioned Batin, and she's dressed him up in a frock, and she's really having fun with sticking it to some of these fascists, and so there's a lot in there, but you really have to slow down and pull it apart.
Mary?
Somebody over there?
Mary, didn't you want to ask a question?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I thought you were just scratching your ear.
Thank you.
It's an auction.
Anybody else, please?
Quick, quick.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've written other books about the Holocaust. Why?
You know, I got into this because I met a survivor, and her story was so powerful that I thought I should write it for her family. And then in the midst of writing it, I went, "This is a book. This is bigger than just writing something down and giving it to a family for their family history." And we sold it. Went to Beacon Press. That was Rena's Promise: The Story of Sisters in Auschwitz. And Rena was on the first transport to Auschwitz. And I was on I said, we like to joke, Simon took me to Bali and in Indonesia, and I took him to Auschwitz.
Not much snorkeling there.
So we decided it was the 70th anniversary of the first Jewish transport to Auschwitz, and I said, and we were in England, and it was $14 to fly to Slovakia. I mean, literally, it's so cheap, and so I was like, oh, well, we could go, let's go. And we got to Slovakia. Nobody in the West knew about this first transport to Auschwitz, which was all mostly teenage girls, 999, which is the next book that came out, 999. Nobody knew about it in the West. It's really hidden history. And we got to Slovakia, and it was an event. There was a memorial, there was the Prime Minister, the President of Slovakia, and there was a survivor. And her name was Edith, and I think she was 90 at the time. I was able to contact her. She was willing to talk to me. I found a couple of other still survivors. They didn't want to talk, but that got me back into the story. And
I had a vow she would never write another book about it.
I mean, it's.
I say, come on, this is the story, and it's called 999.
Yeah. So I sometimes do what I'm told as well.
Yeah.
So,
not very often.
No, but I guess, you know, I'm really moved by the story of these young women. The sisterhood, I call it a sorority of sisterhood in Auschwitz, how they helped each other survive. But I'm also just really moved how young and innocent they were. The things that grabbed me about these, you know, we were all 19 once, and that innocence that you have, and you think you can do anything, and you think that death is not real, and that invincibility, and you know, and that's probably why it does read like a novel, because that's great storytelling, right? And so I get swept away in that, and we know what's coming, and I just I guess I want somebody to tell the stories, and so I got volunteered.
The way you talked about discovering that picture, bottom of the pile, and the emotion that you were demonstrating here, do you, this may be a strange question, but do you find yourself at a certain point in time when you start dreaming about your characters? Do they enter you that deeply?
You know, that's interesting. I do not. I carry them with me all day long, so I think when I get to sleep, I get a break. And by the time I'm done with a book, I'm pretty shattered. You know, I am, plus I just finished the documentary for 999. You know, I'm just wiped out and fairly monosyllabic and probably drink too much.
Well, you missed it now. Yeah.
But when we finished Star-Crossed, I will say, I was thinking of 999 actually with that. When we finished Star-Crossed, about a week later, I looked at Simon and I was like, I miss Annette. Like, I mean, it's like I get to sit down every day with my friend, and I get to write about her, and I love her. I just adore her. And actually, we were doing a talk with Michael Berenbaum yesterday, and he said, "I think you would have been friends." And I was like, "Yeah." And I will say that all of these survivors that I've interviewed and known and gotten very, very close with, you know, they are dear, dear friends of mine, and I miss them regularly now that they're all in their 90s and gone.
Listening. What amazing and beautiful and important work the two of you have done. We're so grateful for what you've brought.
Thank you,
out
Marianne.
here.
Thank you,
really
Catherine.
extraordinary.
It's so nice to be here.